Hello and welcome. My name's Isabelle. I'm joined today by Euan and Jazzi. We're here to discuss the recently announced changes to the Eurovision voting process. So on the 22nd of November, the EBU issued a press release detailing some major changes to the voting for Eurovision 2023. And I think the best thing to do, I think, before we get into it, all of our thoughts and feelings, of which I know there are many, I think the best thing to do is to just I'll quickly read the press release. There's two major, quite different changes that are coming into play for the song contest going forward. So the EBU stated that for this edition of the contest, the countries that qualify from the two semi-finals, 10 from each, will now be decided solely based on the votes cast by viewers of the competition, rather than a combination of a jury and public vote, as has been the case since 2009. And for the first time ever, those watching in countries not taking part in the competition will also be able to vote for their favourite songs online. Their votes will be added together and converted to points that will have the same weight as one participating country in both of the semi-finals and the grand final. Professional juries made up of those working in the music industry will continue to contribute to the result of the grand final, along with viewers in each country taking part and those voting internationally. So that bit is the same. Martin Österdahl, the Eurovision Song Contest's executive supervisor, said, "Throughout its 67-year history, the Eurovision Song Contest has constantly evolved to remain relevant and exciting. These changes acknowledge the immense popularity of the show by giving more power to the audience of the world's largest live music event. He goes on to say, in 2023, only Eurovision Song Contest viewers will decide which countries make it to the grand final. And reflecting the global impact of the event, everyone watching the show, wherever they live in the world, can cast their votes for their favourite songs. By also involving juries of music professionals in deciding the final result," he goes on, "all the songs in the grand final can be assessed on the broadest possible criteria. We can also maintain the tradition of travelling around Europe and Australia to collect points and ensure a thrilling voting sequence, with the winner only revealed at the very end of the show." So that ends Martin Österdahl's little PR message there. And then finally, just to give a bit more detail, the official statement says audiences in all participating countries will still be able to vote by SMS, phone, or via the Eurovision Song Contest app. Those watching in the rest of the world will be able to vote via a secure online platform using a credit card from their country. Following the unprecedented nature of the voting irregularities seen at the 2022 contest, a working group of EBU members was established to look at ways to protect the integrity of the event. Its recommendations were then approved by the reference group, the contest's governing board, and the executive board of the EBU. And then it sort of just gives a bit more detail about the fact that 37 countries are competing, and we know that bit already. The stuff that's really interesting are those two major changes: the fact that the semi-finals will be decided purely by televote for the first time since 2009, and with both the semi-finals and the grand final, one portion equivalent to a whole country's votes will be made up of online votes from anybody all over the world, basically the rest of the world. So there's a lot to unpack there. Let's get into it. And just to start with, why do we think the EBU has made this decision? There's a little bit in that press release about this, but what they say and what is actually going on you might not think they're the same. So I'm curious to know why you think the EBU has taken this decision, which is obviously a pretty dramatic one, and why now? So let's start with you, Jazzi.
I personally think the EBU has taken this decision because in the last few years there have been errors in jury voting, specifically in the semis. there have been issues in the final two, but I don't think they've been as broadly reported on. But I think there's been a few, like juries have either voted backwards or there's been reported collusion between delegations to work together and try to potentially rig the voting. I do think there have also been instances where songs have qualified where the public hasn't awarded them that many points. I think songs that I can really think of are Denmark and Australia in 2017, Azerbaijan this year. And there was clearly songs that the public didn't want to see in the final, and it is Eurovision. So it's what do the public want to see on television? And they were obviously songs that they didn't want to see because they didn't vote for them. So I do feel they wanted to give the public the full state of what they see in the final, but they didn't want to change anything in the final because they still wanted the final to be, they still wanted music professionals to have a say in the final. They just wanted the public to have a say in what they see in the final. I think the rest of the world voting has been put in place because the contest has grown globally over recent years, especially in America, in Canada, in Latin America, where they're getting their own versions of the contest. They want to hype up those versions. So, yeah, there's just like my thoughts on why those changes have been made. I would like to hear Euan's thoughts on that.
I mean, I think my thoughts on why the decisions have been made are much similar. They're trying to increase the global brand of Eurovision and promote it to more countries. We will obviously will discuss the positive and negative aspects of whether that's an approach that should be taken. So that's why they've allowed the rest of the world vote, and yet to getting rid of the jury votes in the semi-finals to create these because of these errors that happen because every single year. I mean, oh, I voted wrong, and that has such a disastrous impact that it changes an entire country's going to the final. So yeah, that's why they've made these decisions. I don't think there's much more I can add on that decision.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've said it. They've sort of said it themselves, haven't they? The you know, the thing that was interesting to me is that there have long been issues, haven't there? Like Jazzi and Euan, like you both said, there's, you know, every year there's some sort of jury kind of drama. But it was 5 countries this last year, wasn't it, in semi-final 2? Like that is on an unprecedented scale, as I said, and they said it didn't change anything materially in terms of the results, but it definitely changed the vibe, and it even changed the vibe of the voting sequence in the grand final, because so many of those countries had, you know, essentially their jury votes synthesized, and the way that was handled wasn't ideal. Like some of them didn't know about it until like afterwards, or until right up when their representatives were giving their jury votes. So that was obviously not ideal, but it was, yeah, it like was a bit jarring to keep seeing, you know, Martin's little face popping up instead of representatives from the countries, and it did kind of, you know, it ruined the vibe a little bit. So I can see that they, you know, maybe they're just sort of like, I'll be interested to see whether this is something that will carry on, or whether they're really wanting to make a show of taking some power away from the juries in direct response to the jury, you know, to the jury tomfoolery that we saw. Go on.
I just wanted to add, they are still, I think they are still voting in the semi-finals. So I think they're really monitoring what the juries do in the semi-finals before deciding whether these jurors can vote in the final. So
oh, that's interesting.
They are voting in the semis.
That's interesting.
They have to be there in case the televote fails. So it's similar to the old system where it was the backup jury.
Gotcha. But what you're saying is an interesting point, that it does provide an opportunity to monitor, you know, to make sure that it's all in order, because obviously the whole reason votes were synthesized in the grand final this year for so many countries was that those were the countries that had voted irregularly in the semis. You don't want the irregular voting to crop up at the grand final, because of course the jury is still going to be at the grand final. You know, you don't want the first moment that you see that juries are voting irregularly to be the grand final. So it does make sense that they would monitor the semis as well. That's actually a really interesting point. And yeah, like the thing for me that's really kind of makes obvious that the way in which the competition is expanding globally is that it's literally expanding globally. Like its appeal is expanding globally. We can literally see that in the, you know, the pioneering of the American Song Contest and, you know, the Latin American Eurovision Latin America, which is a really exciting development. So it does make that part of it does make sense as a natural progression. Well, I can see how both decisions have been made as natural progressions from both last year specifically and also the way things have been going, broader trends. So let's really dig in. Do you do you feel like these changes are a positive overall or a negative? And obviously you might have quite different feelings about the two different major changes, but
Sorry. My feelings are quite different on both these changes. So, removing the juries. No. I think the system was fine as it was. This comes from someone who has lost favourite songs in the semis because of the juries. I do think juries needed more monitoring. Maybe an adjudicator in the room while they voted, having all 5 jurors in separate rooms so they couldn't communicate as they were voting. I know that takes a lot of human resources, so it may not have been possible, but and potentially also having more jurors per country, like increasing from 5 to 10, so there's more of a broader opinion. I think the jury system needed fixing. I don't think it needed removing. Ultimately, I see this as a negative change because there are songs in the past that the juries have saved that absolutely 1000% deserve to be saved, that the public just didn't vote for. I think the two that really spring to mind for me are The Wrong Place in 2021 and Moll in 2018. Vocally and artistically, these songs were 100% deserved their places in those grand finals, and with this new system, we would have lost them. And that is what the juries are there to do. They are there to save these like songs that vocally, artistically are really, really good. And ultimately, the juries, for the most part, did do that. They did sometimes save songs that were a bit too generic. I do agree with that, but vocally they were often on point. So, and I do think vocals should be rewarded at Eurovision. It's a live singing contest. The rest of the world voting, I'm actually okay with. It's given those outside of Europe an opportunity to vote because they've been watching for years. They've been following the contest for years. I just hope it's not abused, and I feel like there's ways it can be. I I I think the verification process that they are proposing to put in place kind of stops that because it means that people can't just use a VPN and just pretend that they're from the USA. There are some countries I do not want included in this, however, I will not say, but I think we all know what countries I'm talking about.
I'm vehemently opposed to both decisions. Just starting with the including the rest of the world vote. People throw around that it's very gatekeepy to say that we shouldn't include the rest of the world, but frankly, I think we should agree it's for the countries of Europe to and surrounding neighbors to share culture, and they're not in Europe. They don't have to say they're not producing a song. I don't really care what they have to say. So just adding just a random jury doesn't really make sense. And I think it's also trying to push Eurovision as this big global brand. Who cares? The point of Eurovision is not to be some big global brand that every country has to be obsessed with this. Yes, it's good that there are Eurovision fans from non-participating countries on outside of Europe and Europe and surrounding areas, but fundamentally, who cares? They're getting their own versions of the contest, which is good. but I firmly don't expect to be able to vote in Latin American Song Contest or the American version Song Contest. So why should they have a jury here? Second point, I also think just having one random jury is terrible, because it's not going to be set up in a system that's going to allow someone from a country that is essentially that is poor to vote compared to a rich one. You're just going to have lots of rich, probably North Americans and certain Asian countries who are going to be able to vote this, and vote without a care in the world. But the prices that they'll be paying for certain countries that are less affluent are then going to be completely ignored, because they're not going to be able to vote potentially. So I completely disagree with the system, but if they're going to have a system, at least make it make sense. And also, the rest of the world is not one big, huge block. The point of Eurovision is to show the different cultures in the different countries. So just saying, oh, lumping everyone who's not European is also kind of rude, because what is loved in Chile is not going to be what's loved in Nigeria. So just giving them all one big vote, I don't think that's really right. So yeah, so I disagree from a spiritual and from a technical standpoint as well. The jury system. Okay, I am a little biased. I tend to more agree with what the juries vote than what the televotes vote, but I lost my favorite in 2019 to what was apparently a jury error. Lithuania qualified and Denmark qualified and Lithuania didn't. And then a juror came in and said, actually, I voted incorrectly. I did it in the wrong order. So the points, I think there was a 1 point difference. So the different command, my favorite would qualified. I still want the jury system to be there, because what this change doesn't address that issue. You're still going to have in the final those juries who are getting this. Look, if this happens at least once a year, the system is clearly not well explained. If we're getting so many people saying, oh, I voted completely in the wrong order, how are they getting the votes to be able to see, like, to think, oh, 26 first? I don't fully understand how they're not still not going to end up with those errors. Also, the safeguarding mechanism within the jury system worked. They noted that there were errors in this one, and they disqualified the juries. They then did them in the final, so that essentially the corruption was there, and then they disqualified them. So it did exactly what it was meant to be doing. So just completely removing them is, I don't really think the good way to go. Also, and I may be completely wrong, but as far as I'm aware, this just going back to the rest of the world vote, the rest of the world vote will have these people voting online. As far as I'm aware, San Marino still does not have its televote under this system, because they don't have an independent telecommunications network. So you're going to also have someone in the United States, someone in New Zealand or Japan or Kenya that will be able to vote, yet someone from an actual participating country will not be allowed to vote. And that also really rubbed me the wrong way. And I really do think this is going to impact the diversity of music. There's so many songs that wouldn't have qualified that are deserving to qualify, and those tend to be the much more niche pieces, because the juries tend to vote for things that are more focused on vocals, and so these really powerful songs. It's not that jurors are boring and they like ballads. They really take note of the how the artist is singing, and things like that will be lost, because it's just going to have a lot more, let's call it cheap, awful pop songs that are just going to the lowest common denominator to try and qualify.
We're going to talk a bit more about that in a bit.
Yeah, so I won't get that. That's my thoughts on it. I'll stop now.
In contrast to, it's really interesting to hear such strong sort of aversions to the changes, and I know that you're not alone in being like, you know, disappointed by at least one of the changes, in your case, you, and both of them. I am broadly positive about both changes, and mostly curious. So taking the juries out of the equation for the semi-finals, I think is a like, I was not expecting this kind of radical dramatic move from the EBU. Like, they're not really known for pushing the envelope like this much all at once. So I'm super curious to see how it'll go, because it's been a really long time since a televote had so much power in Eurovision. And tastes have changed in that time. So I'm fascinated to see what that will mean. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I wouldn't go so far as to say make it all televote, but I have long been in favor of giving the televote more power than the jury. Like I always sort of say a 70-30 split for me personally is something that I think I'd like to see at least a few years to see how it goes. I think that the juries are not as invested, honestly, or not as invested as the viewers in the songs for their own, on their own merit, for their own artistic merit. I think that the jury's agendas are different. They want to preserve their reputation, I guess, which is why they tend to vote conservatively, by which I mean they tend to vote for things that are not like really like pushing the boat, things that are not super experimental, and I kind of hate that, because I'd rather see something very experimental fail terribly. Or I'd always rather see artists doing things that might not work, but they're an interesting risk, than seeing stuff that feels too safe. And juries do tend to vote safely, and it's not necessarily because they love piano ballads. I think that's the whole thing. They're not necessarily even listening to the music. I think that they're there to kind of vote how they think they should vote. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think that their agenda is different, in a way that I don't particularly love. Like, I'm not, I don't think that their opinion, or rather I don't think their votes are the most valuable in the mix. I'm much more interested to know what people want to see in the final than what juries want to see in the final. So in that sense, I'm actually quite excited. I'm quite excited to see what it means. I'm also fully prepared to eat my words and like have just terrible stuff end up in the final, just because of novelty value, because like the televote does tend to enjoy novelty value a lot more than juries do. I've always been sort of done dirty by both juries and televoters, to be honest. Like, some of my favorites have not ended up in finals before, and it's not been specifically because of the jury or specifically because of the televote. Like, just I've had so many cases of my favorites just being underappreciated by everybody. So yeah, I'm not opposed to it. I'm just really curious to see how it goes. Like, I don't envy the host broadcaster this year, like logistically, to do something so completely different to other years, or even just not even so completely different, but even different in just a kind of a significant way. It's a whole other thing to handle. In terms of the international voting aspect, I again am really excited to see and curious to see how that plays out. I think that your kind of, a lot of your anxieties, I think I would echo, if it hadn't been for the fact that the value, the weight of the international vote is going to be so limited, relatively limited. It's going to, we have 37 countries, right? And then one country made up of international votes, essentially, in terms of weighting in the grand final. So
Can I also just say, in terms of what I was saying, like, they're saying one country, equivalent to one country. They also did say Australia was on the coming one. So things are.
Sorry, say again. They said Australia
they did say Australia was a one-off. So things are slippery slopes with the EU.
So you're worried that, this year it'll be representing one country's worth, but maybe next year it'll be weighted to two countries. Yeah, maybe. And I'm fine with that. I mean, I might have different feelings if they start increasing the weight that's given to international votes. But I also might feel great about that if, you know, if we see how it goes this year and it's actually really fun. I really like the idea of Eurovision viewers, Eurovision fans from all over the world being able to finally do more than just sit at home on, you know, trying desperately to find a way of watching. It's not super accessible in a lot of places. I'm hoping this improves the accessibility as well, that, you know, if they have a stake in it, that there'll be more done to ensure that there are broadcasts that are accessible of Eurovision all over the world. I just thought it was so delightful when we learned the news that there'd be an online vote for people all over the world, and just like watching our friends in different parts of the world who have never been able to, like, waking up, you know, because obviously we learned about it before people in like the Americas, like, you know, like seeing people wake up and go, I can vote in Eurovision now, like that was so nice. That was just such a delightful moment. It was, you know, we've been sharing Eurovision kind of moments with like people across the ocean for like years and years, so it is just, it's going to be really fun to be able to kind of, for that to just be this like extra added sort of investment that they can have in it. I can understand why people are apprehensive about it and about what it might mean for the future of the of voting in the contest. I just think that if you take too, and again, this is sort of echoing the thing with juries as well, if you take too conservative an approach and you never sort of adapt and change, you run the risk of missing out on potentially improving the experience of the contest. Like, I think that there's absolutely possible that this might end up being a terrible mistake, but on both counts, both the jury changes and the voting, the international voting count, like maybe there'll be terrible mistakes. Gosh, like so much could go wrong with the verification stuff and all of that. Like Jazzi said, I think that the system that they've put into place sounds like it's a kind of, maybe not foolproof, but it's like you say, you can't just get around it with a VPN. Like, you know, it sounds like it's really like a vote per credit card detail essentially, but I'm sure that there will be ways to abuse it. The thing is, if you don't take those risks, you'll never know. Like, there's a potential for this, you know, next contest to be really, really exciting in ways that a contest hasn't been before. So I feel positively about it, and I'm also completely ready to be proved wrong. I might eat my words, you know, come Eurovision itself. We'll just see. So Euan, I know that you've got a couple more points to add. Go on.
Sorry to hark on about how much I don't like it, but I think also something that does need to be noted is just how terrible the timing of this is. I think a lot of Euro fans seem to think that countries will still have time to like change their song and to pick something more terrible, but countries have picked their song, they've picked their selection. They might not have announced anything. They know what they're doing for this year, so they've not had no time to adapt to this effect. Like, yes, I get that they couldn't have just done this like June, July, because they need to do the investigations, they need to go through the reference group, they need to know who's on the reference group as well, things like that. So they can't just do it immediately, but then to do it in the technically the middle of the Eurovision season, it does seem quite unfair to particularly the smaller countries that are going to. We'll discuss which countries, but the countries that are going to be most affected by this decision. I also just really wanted to say this. Isabelle made a point about how the jury's acts tend to be more conservative, but the conservative nature of it also is strongly reflected on how the jury votes are combined. They don't pick their favorites and then combine them. They rank all of the songs, then they combine that. So if one juror really loves this experimental piece, it's going to get voted down. This change only stops that happening in the semi-final because there's no there. As soon as it gets to the final, you're not going to get those experimental pieces that may have potentially got to the final. So it doesn't actually do anything to address what was wrong with that. It doesn't stop the conservative nature of the jury vote. So it does, like, they could have changed that and had such a drastic impact on how the juries work. Because you would not be able to vote a country down, and for the countries that tend to have certain ones always in the bottom, Armenia, Azerbaijan, as an example of those two together. If one jury decides, hey, I'm actually going to vote for the other country, the other ones are still going to be able to completely negate that choice. So it doesn't really do anything there. Also, because they've done this they've done this because there was issues with jury vote, but they were putting if they were trying to manipulate the vote, they're putting all that effort into the jury vote because it was seen as easier. They're now just going to put all that manipulation into televote, which is a hell of a lot easier to manipulate. All you just need is a lot of SIM cards to vote 20 times, which there were instances, I think the stories are of 2000.
Although that won't work because this isn't a televote, it's an online vote, and it.
No, sorry, the televote as in the televote for each individual country, not the rest of the world vote. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So there is still issues, those countries there.
Go ahead, Jazzy.
Well, wasn't this an issue in?
Sorry, start that bit again
before it unmuted. This was an issue in 2021 with Moldova, and apparently they'd manipulated their televote result, and it wasn't it like, and it would have been a lot closer. And ultimately, it was quite funny because it was actually ended up being Denmark that didn't qualify as a result of this, although they qualified as a result of a voting error in 2019. So it's like, it's just, I think there's issues with both. I think there's issues with the televote as well. I think the televote can be manipulated.
Yeah, if you're going to manipulate a vote, you're going to manipulate a vote. You're going to find a way to do it, which is basically, I think, what you were saying as well, Euan. Yeah, I'll be interested to, which is why, coming back to the sort of the point I hinted at earlier, I wonder if this isn't the EBU's way of showing that they're doing something about the voting irregularities, the jury manipulation that we saw in 2022, and they may well be prepared for that to not necessarily iron out any corruption allegations. I would not be, and maybe this is just very cynical of me, I would not be surprised to see the EBU announce a return to the same system that we've had for years and years in 2024. Right? Like, there's a part of me that thinks that this might just be them making a statement. Maybe it's them punishing juries, taking some power away from juries because of what happened in 2022. Maybe they're also kind of wanting to just show that they're doing something about it. And maybe not, but there's the cynical part of me is thinking this might just be them like making a statement. And we might just go back to the old system of jury televote split for 2022. Either way, no system is ever going to be perfect, like on any scale, but on this scale particularly, and any system's going to be, you know, manipulable regardless. And I completely agree that this doesn't iron out, you know, this doesn't remove the possibility for manipulation. I am fully prepared for televoting, rigging, accusations all over Twitter. Come May. I'm fully prepared for it to be just a storm, honestly. But it always is. It's just going to be a slightly different flavor of drama this year. So moving on.
Sorry, can I just add just one final point on that topic? You said that it's a symbol to the juries to take them away and then possible change back. But the fact that they disqualified the juries, a decision that they only took once because the Belarusians they told all of their jury votes. It wasn't because of any jury errors. So the fact that they already made that standpoint, that symbol, in such a blatant, broad way, they kind of didn't need to make the second statement. They could have.
They might not be. I'm just speculating. They could have waited to see
the fallout. But I think you are right in that it does seem that it is a statement in itself. But I feel they already made that statement in May with such a blatant way of Maren Ofsdal saying, these are the votes for this country.
You say that, but we know how it went down because we're Euro fans and we read all of the press releases and the statements. I'm still telling people about what happened. There are people who watched Eurovision in May and don't know that that's what happened. So on the one hand, yeah, that was, it's not like they were passive. They did respond to it. And on the other hand, I mean, this is a more obvious statement. Like, there are plenty of Eurovision viewers who won't know what happened in May, because I mean, I'm literally, like I say, like, I'm still like telling people, oh, but you know that this is what happened in May, and people are like, what? How come nobody told us? Because the thing is, if you're not like following the EBU's missives, and if you're not right deep into it like we are, if you're a casual Eurovision viewer, you watch once a year and then you just have Eurovision songs on your playlist for the rest of the year, which I think is the case for a lot of Eurovision viewers, you don't know that that's what happened in May. And actually, a change like this might be what it takes. All of this to say, I'm not saying it's right. I'm just, I've got my speculation hat on. So we sort of already veered into this territory. But are there any specific countries or kinds of artists, genres of music, that you think these changes will particularly benefit or particularly hurt?
I think countries that will benefit from this are countries that aren't too afraid to think outside the box. I'm thinking countries like Moldova, Norway, Finland, who often have like these big stage shows that are more televote friendly than they are jury friendly. These are three countries that I don't think particularly care about the jury. And I think we've seen that through their national finals, and they don't care about the jury, particularly Norway. I think they've made that statement pretty clear with their national final, although I think they might be changing it a little bit. I also think this will benefit countries with large diasporas, such as Poland, Lithuania, Greece, Cyprus, which I think that was always something that happened in the past, but it'll definitely benefit them now. And it's not always a bad thing, because they do sometimes send quality songs. So I'm not saying this is a bad thing at all. It may even help songs that are actually good from these countries. I think there are countries that will also be very negatively affected by this. Albania, Australia, Belgium, Switzerland, countries that tend to send high-end, high-quality music, and it may not instantly be a televote grabber, but the quality in the songs being quite undeniable. I think the two really the two that really stand out to me are Albania and Belgium. That this is often the case, that Belgium and Albania don't often qualify for the televote, but they do with the juries because their songs are so high end and so high quality. And these are two countries it's really going to hurt. And the types of songs I think will benefit from this are songs that that have big stage shows. And I think the genres that will benefit are the big up-tempo bops, both male and female. I also think rock will benefit quite well, because it often picks up quite a high televote. I think they're the two genres that will really benefit from this. I think there's like high-end, like ballads, more jazzy songs, like Sentimentai from Lithuania this year. Songs like that I think will be negatively impacted by this, because these are songs that for some reason the televotes just don't vote for. They should vote for them because they're good songs, and the juries are often saving these songs, and they should be saving these songs. So it's just a mess. I hate it. I absolutely hate it. Like, no, why did you do this? I'm gonna stop now before I get like really angry. And also San Marino, because San Marino are just not gonna be able to vote like at all now in the semi-finals, and that is absolutely that's awful. Like, they don't get any say in the semi-finals whatsoever now. The only say they'll get, because I don't know if they can vote in the, like, people in San Marino can. I don't know if they can vote in the semi-final that Italy vote in, because like their tally vote, I think it's their tally votes are like the
They
same.
theoretically could if they had the Italian number, because they use the Italian phone network.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So it just sucks. Sorry. I'm sorry to the EBU. This was not a good move.
I think also something too important to remember in the mid to late 2000s in Eurovision is there was lots of controversy around diasporal voting, um, big cultural blocks voting together, and whether that's I firmly do not believe anyone is sitting down there, hey, they're my neighbor, I'm gonna vote for them. But if it's played on your radio all the time and you've got a completely integrated music industry, you're going to vote for the people you recognize. I think this is really going to hurt those culturally isolated countries, those ones with very unique ones. So Portugal, Albania, because let's face it, no one cares about Portuguese culture in Eurovision because I think it's sad because they produce such high quality and amazing songs, but people don't care. Um, the juries will have brought forward quite a number of countries. I think with Maro was brought was made the final because of the jury vote. So yeah, I think those smaller countries that are more unique, not less connected with other big bloc countries are going to be severely affected by it. I think those important quiet moments in the contest of high polished, like Jai said, are really going to do it. Like I did not like Belgium in 2021 until after the contest, and I realized that was such a great performance. I'm really glad that they managed to make the final. The jury's made the right choice. They should have allowed that high quality piece to make the final. And I also think what's really going to be affected, well, we're probably not going to see it as much this year because countries have no, they've not announced it, but they've picked the songs, they've picked the national finals. We're going to see such a huge drop if this continues in the following year in things that are a little bit more out there. It's going to go a lot more generic, more common, appealing to a common denominator, and it's just going to, we're going to lose all of that special uniqueness. And I can rant and rave for this, but I will concede to Jazzy.
It'll be another 2008. Girly bops, rock. It'll be another 2008.
I mean, I wasn't going to say it, but we're just going to be filled with like the most basic, cheap Swedish produced girly pop groups that are just going to be awful.
And see, I disagree because I think that we're already seeing stuff that is trying to go for jury appeal, do generic, do safe. And it may be like, I get what you mean, but I don't see how that's going to be amped up by the presence of a more powerful televote. I think what we might see is more novelty. I think what we are definitely going to see is rock doing better, and I'm delighted by that. I mean, I like infamously think most rock that we've seen at Eurovision is weak sauce. I think it's like a bit crap, a bit mediocre, a bit mid, but I'm in the minority. Like most people who enjoy rock love, you know, rock at Eurovision. It just happens to be the case that I've like only ever loved like 2 rock songs at Eurovision. But I am excited if it means that we'll see more I think it will mean more diversity actually. This year's going, as you sort of touched on, this year's going to be an interesting sort of half and half moment, because like you say, the countries haven't had a chance to respond to the changes. So what we're going to see is we'll see the countries pitching what they would have pitched anyway, and we'll see the new system responding to it, which I think will be fascinating. And I think it might be good, and I think it might be bad. I don't think we can actually know. And then it'll be fascinating if the changes continue through in 2024. It'll be fascinating to see how each of the countries responds, you know, from the start of their selection process to the news. I mean, you'd think it would also mean maybe more national finals. I mean, and you know, and maybe not. I'm also prepared for it to not make as much of a difference as we all think it's going to make. And really, we just don't know. We're just going to have to see. I'm going to wrap it up there. I think we could, like you say,
Actually, can I just have one more final point? It's a positive one. I'll actually say something nice. I do think we're going to end up seeing some amazing, ridiculous staging. And I think that because they're going to try and catch the eye more, and I think that will be the one positive that I can see will be from the system.
I'm curious to see how the rest of the world vote impacts the final results. It's not a huge influence that they'll have, but again, talking about diaspora, I'm so fascinated. I'm so ready to see. Yeah, I'm so ready to see Spain doing better. I'm so ready to see places, countries like Armenia that have huge diasporas doing better with the televote. Like, great. I can't wait. I'm so excited. And yes, let's end on that positive note. Don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed any of what we had to say. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We've got plenty of these reaction videos to come through the season. Lots of discussions, got some live streams coming up as well. Follow that Eurovision site with on all our socials. We're that Euro site on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And you can keep up with our new podcast episodes by following that Euro podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And with that, I'm just going to say thank you, Jazzi and Euan, for bringing some rich and nuanced discussion to this subject, which I'm sure we'll be seeing plenty of debate about in the months to come. And all that's left is to say goodbye.